Hello everyone, welcome to the sixth mini workshop. My name is Emily Zastro, and today the topic is differences in Japan and the United States that I notice. So I have been living here in Japan for 4 years. I am from the United States, and there are some things that I have noticed that are different in the two countries and cultures. So notice in the title I wrote that I notice. Okay, so this is all coming from my perspective. These are not necessarily things that are accurate in every area and location in the United States, nor in every area of Japan. I have lived in Nonoichi the entire time I have been in Japan. And I have lived in several different states in the United States and traveled all over the US. So I am very well familiar with the US. But these are still just from my perspective and my ideas that I notice. And I also wanted to talk about this because many students have asked about culture in other countries. And I agree that culture is a really fascinating topic. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the differences between the US and Japan. But also keep in mind that even though there are a lot of differences, there are many more similarities. So always remember that people are much more alike than different, no matter where you are in the world. We all are much more similar than different. But these are just some kind of subtle and not always so subtle differences. So let's take a look. We'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so when talking about culture, let's first identify what is culture. So culture is the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. All right, and what are some examples of culture? For example, language, clothing or fashion, food, of course, is a big part of culture, holidays and festivals, ceremonies and rituals, norms. For example, norms are like things that you do on a daily basis that is normal for a particular culture. Like in Japan, a norm is to remove your shoes before entering into a home. But in the United States, that is not the norm for every family. Some people do it, some do not. Okay, also pastimes, which is like hobbies. Okay, how people spend their free time and what activities they enjoy doing. Arts and crafts, their beliefs, and music. So all of these are different aspects of culture. Now, personally, I think that one of the big differences between the United States and Japan and their cultures is that American culture is very individualistic and Japanese culture is very collectivist. So, what does that mean? Well, let's look at the definitions. For a collectivist society, which again is like in Japan. So the emphasis is on the needs and goals of the group as a whole over the needs and desires of each individual. In such cultures, relationships with other members of the group and the interconnectedness between people play a central role in each person's identity. So basically, this is saying that um, the group of the culture or of the society is very important, and how the each person identifies is with this group. Okay, so basically you're putting the group over yourself. the group's needs, the group's goals and desires over what you as an individual want. Now, in an individualistic society, it is a society which is characterized by individualism, which emphasizes the individual over the entire group. Individualistic cultures are centered around the self being independent instead of identifying with a group mentality. So this is very much an American society, is this individualism. Growing up, you are, as an American, you're pretty much always told to be an individual, to not worry about what others think of you, and to, be unique, do what you want to do. So all of things that parents encourage their children to do are really quite individualistic. And I don't know what Japanese parents tell their children, but it may be different. And I think that this is one of the things that really stands out to me between the differences in the two cultures. Okay, let's go ahead and look at some specific aspects of the two societies and how they are different. First, let's look at how university is different. You are all university students, so I think that would be interesting to you. How is it in the US and how is it in Japan? So as a teacher here at KIT, what I notice is in Japan, it's common for classrooms to be very quiet. Students often, copy the board, what a teacher writes, and they listen very well. So in the United States, classrooms aren't so quiet, and it is okay to interrupt the teacher, to raise your hand, to ask a question. And actually, it is even encouraged. Teachers like when you ask questions. They like if you interrupt, and maybe you even disagree with what the teacher has said. That's okay. It tells the teacher you are listening, you are active in the conversation, and you are curious what is being taught in the classroom. Another difference is in Japan, the classroom tends to be very much lecture style. So the teacher is talking kind of like what I am doing now. This video is very much lecture style. I am just speaking, and I am not able to engage with students. So that is a lecture. In the US, it's common to have a lot of discussions and debates in a university classroom, where you might be in a small group or even the whole classroom, and you can freely discuss the topic or maybe even have a debate. Someone believes this, another person believes the opposite. And why do they believe that? Another difference I notice is here in Japan, a lot of my students are involved in clubs, and I notice they are very long hours. So it takes a lot of dedication and time to devote to these clubs. However, in a university setting, extracurricular activities are much more relaxed. They're not so demanding, and they're not required. So that is something that I noticed. Here in Japan, it is very important to take exams to get accepted into universities, and you maybe cannot get accepted into the one you want. So in the United States, I think it's more difficult to actually graduate and to finish rather than get accepted. It's easy to get accepted to a lot of American universities, but to actually finish and graduate is a little bit more difficult. And also, school year begins in April here in Japan, but in the States, the school year begins in August, sometimes early September. Okay, let's go to the next topic, which I labeled on the street. So this is something that stood out to me immediately when I came to Japan, is that people always wait at the crosswalk. Um, no matter what, even if there is no car in sight at all, everyone still waits until it is green for the pedestrian, for the person walking. So I found that quite amazing because in the US, sometimes you wait until the light is green for the pedestrian. But if there are no cars, you just cross the street. So that really stood out to me as a difference. Also, driver's license. So getting a driver's license here in Japan is very expensive, mostly because it requires that the lesson that you have to take. I do not have a driver's license here in Japan, but I know that you have to do a course like driving school, which is very expensive. Um, in the U.S., it is not required to do that sort of lesson or driving school. It's quite easy to get a driver's license, and then it costs maybe $20-$30. Depends on the state, but it's not expensive and it's not difficult to get. The cars also are different. So to me, I noticed that all the cars here in Japan, they look new and clean and very small and rust free. No rust whatsoever. Um, Rust is that brown reddish that you see on any sort of metal parts, but I never see rust on cars in Japan. Now in the US, cars are of all different ages, sizes, and conditions. So there are some that are very small, some that are very large, old, new, bright and shiny, and then some that are rusty, broken window. So everything you can see on the street. And you may know this one already, but of course here, drive on the left, and then in the US, drive on the right. This is also something that I realized when I came to Japan, that it is not polite to walk and eat on the streets here. But in the US, no one cares. You can walk and eat a snack. You can eat a slice of pizza. It doesn't matter. No one cares. Of course, do not throw the trash on the street, but no one cares if you eat on the street while walking. Another thing in Japan is it is sometimes very difficult to find a trash bin. And once you do, it's great. And then they are usually separated into different recycling bins, which is great. But in the US, trash bins are so easy to find. They are all over on the streets. Once you are in a building, you can easily find trash bins. So I found this very different. And this is a quite sad one, actually, is so in Japan, it is rare to see homeless people on the street, thankfully. But unfortunately, in the US, in about every city you go to, if you go downtown to the city center, you will probably see a homeless person. And it's a very unfortunate situation, and some cities are much worse than others, but it is a reality. And thankfully, I find that very rare here. Also, the streets here in Japan are extremely clean. It's almost remarkable how clean they are. In the US, it's not always so clean. It depends where you go. If you are in New York City, of course, a street will be much dirtier than a very small town. But it just varies. Some streets are very dirty, but here in Japan, streets are clean everywhere. Usually. usually. I did see some dirty streets in Osaka. Okay, let's go to the next topic, communication. So Japanese people tend to communicate in more of a non-direct and subtle way. Japanese is used, when the Japanese language is spoken, it's used with a lot of kind of subtle language undertones. So people may not directly say what they maybe want to say or what they are implying, but still the other person understands what they are saying. So as an American, it can be almost frustrating because we tend to be very direct, very blunt. We have no problem saying no. And then, we keep it very simple, like no, yes, and very direct. So this is definitely a different way of communicating. Also, on public transportation, on buses, trains here in Japan, it's very quiet. No one is talking on their phone, which I find great. It's very respectful for other people around them. I really like that. But in the US, some people don't care and they will just talk on the phone if they're on a train or on a bus. So it can be quite irritating to others, but it is common to hear that. So Japanese, of course, is a language that is predominantly spoken here in Japan among everyone. But in the US, because we have so many immigrants from all over the world and people have been migrating there for a couple hundred years, so we have many different languages that you can hear, especially in the cities. So that is definitely one difference. And I notice also there's a little bit less eye contact here among strangers. And in the US, people tend to keep eye contact even with people that they do not know. If you're speaking to them, you want to show that you are paying attention to them, you are listening, and you're fully engaged in the conversation, so you have that eye contact. So I also noticed this soon after coming to Japan, is that hugs are not common, even among friends. But among friends and family in the US, it's very common to give a hug goodbye, or if you see your friend you haven't seen in a few days, give them a hug, as a hello. So this was also a difference. Okay, let's go on to food. So vending machines are everywhere in Japan, which I found so fascinating. They can be seen literally everywhere. And in the US, vending machines are not everywhere. Vending machines are in select places, and typically they are outside of stores, like a supermarket, or maybe like inside a hotel. They're pretty much reserved for buildings, right outside of a building or in a building. They are not in such random places and everywhere like here in Japan. Another difference is until Japan, I never saw heated beverages in a vending machine. So I thought that was really cool. Never saw that until here. Another thing I never saw until Japan was how you can order food using a ticket, and then you just give them the ticket and show them your order. So in the US, we don't have that. I have never seen this at all in the US. Instead, in restaurants, there's always a waiter or waitress who will take your order. And in some restaurants, you can still smoke cigarettes in Japan, which I found very surprising. In the US, you cannot smoke at all in restaurants. I'm not sure how long that rule has been applied, but it's been many years where you cannot smoke in restaurants. And I also found that outdoor seating is kind of rare here. Uh, Maybe not in all of Japan, but definitely Ishikawa. It's hard to go to a restaurant and find outdoor seating. But I can understand if it's probably because of the weather. We have so much rain here, so it can be difficult to sit outside. But in the US, many restaurants have outdoor seating, maybe in the front or in the back of the restaurant. Also, when going to a restaurant here in Japan, it's common to find a set, like a set meal. But in the US, we don't usually have just a set. We have a large menu, and then you just choose what you want, not only just a set. So in addition to menus at a restaurant, here in Japan, it's a little more difficult to modify, to change items on a menu. If this is what it says on the menu, then you just have to order that. You cannot usually substitute, I don't know, miso soup for, I don't know, rice or something, or tempura. But in the US, it's very common to say, oh, I don't like cheese. Can you please remove the cheese? Or, oh, can you add an avocado to the salad? So those sort of requests are asked many, many times to waiters and waitresses, and it's rarely a problem. Also in Japan, there is no tipping, which, is nice. But in the US, you pretty much always have to tip. And it's, at a minimum, a very minimum, 10% of the bill. But really, it should be about 15% or 20% of your bill. So that can really add up. If you spend $20 and you may have to give a $4 tip. So it's nice here in Japan when you don't have to tip, saves you some money. Another thing I noticed is in the supermarkets here, there is a lot of packaging and plastic wraps on produce, so on fruits and vegetables, on almost everything. But in the US, just like in this picture, fruits and vegetables are pretty much open. You just grab and put in your basket or maybe put in another bag, but things are not individually wrapped so much like here. Also, another thing that I found really nice here in Japan is konbinis have a lot of fresh and healthy food, which I was so surprised to find because a konbini in the US, called a convenience store, very rarely has anything healthy or fresh. It's usually full of just junk food. So I think this is a really nice feature to have at konbinis here. So we talked about different aspects of cultures and of Japan and the United States. And you can see that some things are maybe a little bit more positive than others. There are some pros and cons to both cultures in both countries. And it really comes down to each culture is unique. It's hard to say that one is better than the other, not just for Japan or the US, but for any country in the world. And just accept and appreciate the differences that we all have. But again, remember that we are all so similar, and the similarities are much more common than the differences. Okay, so what I would like you to do is think about any comments or questions you may have. And are there any other differences that you can think of between the US and Japan? And do you wonder about any other areas of life in the US? So, is there anything that you are curious about in the US? Please write your comments and questions below the video in YouTube, and I will respond if you have a question or if you have a comment. I would be really happy to see what you have to say and what you think about this. And as always, please follow the QR code for your attendance. And thank you so much for watching this mini workshop. I hope you found it interesting. I think culture is such a fascinating topic, so I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Goodbye.